It depends. A while ago, I made a video where I tried to learn Megumi, and during that experience, I got hit with a question I hadn't really thought about before. Is Jujutsu Shenanigans actually beginner friendly? Because if you've been playing for a while, the answer feels obvious. Of course it is. You spawn in, punch people, get your ass whooped, and eventually figure things out. But if you're completely new, like you've never touched a Battlegrounds game before, then that's where things get interesting. Because Jujutsu Shenanigans sits in a really weird spot. It's one of the easiest Battlegrounds games to get into, but at the same time, it can be one of the most brutal experiences for a new player. So today I want to answer a simple question. If somebody installed Roblox right now and decided JJS was their first Battlegrounds game, would they have a good time? To JJS's credit, the first impression is fantastic. There are no complicated menus, no stat systems, no grinding, no skill trees, no spinning for abilities, no spending 6 hours punching a training dummy, unless you want to. You literally join the game and start playing. Compared to a lot of Roblox combat games, that's refreshing. Now of course this isn't unique to JJS. The whole appeal of the Battlegrounds formula is that everything is accessible regardless of how long you've been playing. That's why these games got so popular. The game trusts you to learn by doing. That's one of JJS's biggest strengths. A beginner can understand the basic objective within 30 minutes. Hit people. Don't get hit. Don't explode. Simple. But simplicity doesn't always mean accessibility, because after about 5 minutes you realize something. Everyone else knows what they're doing, and you don't. I feel like as more time passes, the skill gap in this game starts to resemble the source material. See, Jujutsu Shenanigans sells you on the idea of casual fun, but the reality is a hyper sweaty fighting game disguised as a blocky sandbox. Because there are no stats, you can't outlevel your opponent. You can't blame a bad build or a low roll. If you get absolutely dismantled in a public server, it is a pure unadulterated skill issue, and that's where the accessible facade starts to crack, and this is reflected by this game's community. Oh boy, the players. Not all of them, obviously. You'll find a bunch of friendly people willing to teach new players, but every Battlegrounds game develops a certain species of player, the kind that treats every public server like the grand finales of an international tournament. JJS is no exception, and unfortunately new players have to fight those people a lot. This creates a weird situation where the game itself is fairly approachable, but the environment surrounding it isn't. That's not unique to JJS, it's true of most fighting games, but Roblox adds its own special flavor to the experience. A lot of players only see things from their own perspective. If they lose, it's because your character is broken. If they win, it's because they're skilled. There are also weird stigmas attached to certain characters, so new players can end up getting mocked for simply trying someone out. Let's go into more detail. A lot of the more notorious players in this game share one very specific trait. They only understand the game from their perspective, like I just said. And that sounds obvious, but hear me out. When a new player gets comboed for 20 seconds straight, they think, wow, that was annoying. When an experienced player gets comboed for 20 seconds straight, they think, should have side dashed. The veteran player isn't necessarily wrong. The problem is that they've been playing for so long that they've forgotten what it's like to not know that. This creates a weird disconnect between experienced players and everyone else. A new player complains about a character being frustrating and they're told to adapt. A new player struggles against a combo and they're told to get better. A new player asks for advice and half of the responses sound like they were written by someone who has forgotten that beginners exist. And to be fair, this is not exclusive to JJS. Every competitive game has people like this. So instead of learning from people who are slightly better than them, beginners often end up fighting people who have completely mastered the game. That's where a lot of toxicity comes from. It's not always trash talk, it's not always targeting. A lot of the time it's just a complete lack of perspective. People assume that because something is easy for them, it must be easy for everyone else. And nowhere is that more obvious than in character discussions. Every character has a reputation. Play Akari and you're bad. Play Mahito and you're brain dead. Play Megumi and you're a spammer. Play Yuji and everyone suddenly assumes that you've dedicated your entire life to optimizing movement tech. At some point, people stop talking about how the characters actually play and start talking about the stereotypes surrounding them. And that's a terrible environment for someone who's still trying to figure out which buttons do what. Imagine joining the game, trying a character because they looked cool, and immediately getting hit with a psychological evaluation from 3 different people in chat. Like, gang, I just got here. Leave me alone. The funny thing is that most of these players don't realize they're doing it. They spent so much time inside the game's ecosystem that they've started treating community opinions as objective facts. And for new players, that's arguably more intimidating than any combo in the game. Let's imagine a scenario. Put yourself in the mind of a classic Yuji main. This is all alleged, by the way. There might not even be anything up there. Let's say you just got out of ranked, disgruntled. You decide to hop into a public server to cool off. You find a random player and challenge them to a fight. But something's off. They're playing passive. And I don't mean staying at rage and throwing moves. I mean passive. They're holding block, backing up, waiting for you to do something, refusing to engage unless they absolutely have to. And somehow, you lose. Now you're annoyed. Obviously they're playing lame. Obviously they're scared. Obviously they're not good. Obviously they're ruining the game. At least that's what goes through your head. Now, take a step back and think from the other guy's perspective. He started playing 3 days ago. He doesn't know optimal combos. He doesn't know movement tech. He doesn't know which attacks are safe, which attacks are punishable, or what half of the characters even do. All he knows is that every time he presses buttons, someone turns him into a kimbap short. So what does he do? He blocks. He waits. He plays cautiously because from his perspective, that's the logical thing to do. He's not trying to disrespect you. He's not trying to waste your time. He's trying to survive. And that's where the disconnect happens. The experienced player sees someone refusing to play correctly. The new player sees someone expecting them to sprint headfirst into a situation they don't understand. Neither side is really thinking about the other. One player is asking, why won't this guy fight me? The other is asking, why is this guy acting like I should already know how to play? And that's the mindset you run into a lot in JJS. People stop evaluating situations based on what is reasonable and start evaluating them based on what they would do. If a strategy works against them, it's annoying. If a character beats them, it's bad. If a new player struggles, they should adapt. Everything gets filtered through their own experience, and after a while you start to realize that a lot of the toxicity in JJS isn't caused by the mechanics. It's caused by people forgetting what it was like to be new. And the problem isn't even that these players exist. Every competitive game has sweats. The problem is that JJS doesn't do much to separate new players from experienced ones. Once you leave the safety of a private server, you're thrown into the same servers as people with hundreds of hours of experience. Imagine trying to learn basic movement and combo timing while some Yuji Chud is performing a 30-second combo he found on YouTube 3 hours ago. That's the reality for a lot of new players. The result is that learning can feel much harsher than it actually is. Instead of gradually figuring things out, many players spend their first hour getting launched into the atmosphere and wondering what just happened. And to be fair, this isn't entirely the community's fault. Battlegrounds games naturally reward experience. The longer someone plays, the more aggressive they become to anyone who doesn't know the fundamentals. JJS just makes that skill gap very visible. But before we move on, let's talk about these players for a second. In simpler terms, bums. The average sweaty JJS player can usually be identified by a few key traits. They only play Yuji or Hikari, think every zoner is spam, have an ego held together by shoestring and duct tape, and are almost always cosplaying as something, usually all four at the same time. If you play JJS for more than 15 minutes, you know exactly who I'm talking about. And these two characters are a pretty good representation of the player base I just described. Hikari is one of the most popular beginner picks for a reason. He's an all-rounder. His combos are straightforward, his game plan is easy to understand, and you can get decent results without spending 50 hours in a private server practicing text. That's why a lot of newer players gravitate towards characters like Hikari and Mahito. They let you focus on learning the game itself instead of a PhD thesis worth of mechanics. Then there's Yuji. Yuji is basically the poster child for aggressive playstyles in JJS. He's fast, versatile, and rewards players who have spent way too much time optimizing every interaction imaginable. As a result, he's become the character of choice for a large portion of the game's sweat population. And when you're new, fighting a good Yuji player can feel ridiculous. 1 second they're in front of you, the next they're halfway across their map, canceling animations, chaining movement tech, landing black flashes, and performing enough mix-ups to make you question whether you're actually playing the same game. The issue isn't that Yuji is impossible to beat. The issue is perception. New players aren't looking at that and thinking, wow, I learned something valuable, guys, woohoo. They're looking at it and wondering what the f just happened. And that's really the theme of the new player experience in JJS. The game itself isn't especially difficult to understand. Most characters have simple foundations, the controls are accessible, and the mechanics are relatively easy to grasp. The challenge comes from the people who have already mastered those mechanics and turned them into something completely unrecognizable. So when people ask whether JJS is beginner friendly, if they even do, what am I making this video for? The answer isn't as simple as yes or no, because at this point we've talked about the characters and we've talked about the balance. The hard part is everyone else. But before we blame JJS for all of this, we should probably ask an important question. Is any of this actually unique to JJS? Because if every Battlegrounds game has sweaty players, steep skill gaps, and newcomers getting fucking folded, then maybe JJS isn't doing anything wrong. Maybe this is just part of the genre. So let's compare it to its biggest competitor. Now before I say anything else, I need to make something very clear. I like TSB. A lot. I have played an embarrassing amount of TSB. I am a One Punch Man fanatic. It helped define the Battlegrounds genre on Roblox, and a lot of the things we take for granted today were either popularized by it or refined by it. Without TSB, there's a very good chance JJS doesn't look the way it does today.
4 big guys, and they bust on my eyes. They eat my ass just like apple pie.
So none of this is coming from a place of hatred. If anything, it's coming from disappointment. Because for years, TSB was the Battlegrounds game. The combat felt smooth, the destruction system was so impressive.
4 big guys.
The animations were flashy, and despite all the clones that popped up trying to imitate it, none of them really managed to replace it. The problem is that eventually TSB became a victim of its own success. When you've been sitting at the top for so long, innovation stops feeling urgent. And while other games started experimenting with new mechanics, new systems, and new ways to keep players engaged, TSB remained, well, TSB. Again, that's not automatically a bad thing. Plenty of games survive by sticking to what works, but Battlegrounds games live and die by player interaction. When the game itself stops changing, the people playing it become the content. And after years of that, something weird happened. The casual player slowly started disappearing. Not entirely, of course, but enough that the average public server feels very different from what it used to. The players who remained became increasingly dedicated, more optimized, more competitive, more interested in winning than experimenting. And over time, TSB developed a reputation. When people talk about TSB today, they rarely ever talk about the destruction physics or the combat design. They talk about the sweats, the hackers, the kill farmers, the players who somehow treat every random public server like there's prize money on the line. Whether that's entirely fair isn't really the point. The reputation exists, and for a new player, reputation matters. Now compare that to JJS. JJS absolutely has sweaty players. We spent the last several minutes making fun of them. The difference is that JJS still feels like it's moving. Characters get reworked, new mechanics get added, strategies evolve, the meta shifts every few months. The game constantly gives players something new to learn. As a result, the community feels less settled. You'll still encounter people who haven't stood up from their chairs since the Heian era.
Do you get it? Did you get It's a little reference joke. We do some tomfoolery around here.
But you'll also encounter people learning new characters, adapting to balance changes, and figuring things out alongside everyone else. The skill gaps still exist, it's just harder for people to notice. And that's what really separates these two games from a beginner's perspective. JJS can be overwhelming because it's active. TSB can be overwhelming because it's stagnant. One game asks you to keep up with a constantly changing environment. The other game asks you to catch up to years of accumulated experience. And to be honest, I don't think TSB is doomed, not even close. The reason I'm criticizing it so much is because I've seen how good it can be. The core gameplay is still fantastic. That's why people stuck around for so long in the first place. I don't think TSB needs to reinvent itself completely. I just think it needs something new. Something that reminds people why they fell in love with it to begin with.
Hey guys, it's me editing. I just wanted to let you know that this was recorded before the burst update dropped. So a lot of what I said just now is kind of weird because it seems that TSB is starting to innovate with its anti-team system and Zombie Man's Ultimate. Speaking of Zombie Man's Ultimate, I hope they make it more compatible for lower NPCs because when I ult as Zombie Man, that shit lags my whole computer. It's weird. But yeah, I do think they're trying to branch out and be a little different now. So I guess time will tell. Anyway, back to the video.
Because when I compare JJS and TSB, I'm not looking at one game that's winning and another that's failing. I'm looking at one game that's currently evolving and another that's waiting for its next evolution. Oh my god. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Balance changes. Now, if you spend any time in the JJS community, you'll know that balance discussions are completely normal and totally civil. I'm fucking with you. These conversations are usually one bad day away from becoming a hostage negotiation. But what's interesting isn't the balance changes themselves, it's how different groups of players react to them. Take a character like Hikari. Whenever Hikari gets nerfed, rest in peace 1 and 2, newer players tend to feel it immediately. He's simple, he's reliable, he's forgiving. And when you're still learning movement, combos, and matchups, having a straightforward character can make the entire game feel less overwhelming. So when a character like that gets hit with nerfs, newer players often see it as the game becoming harder. Meanwhile, experienced players are usually looking at things from a completely different angle. They're thinking about optimization, matchups, competitive viability, how the character performs at higher levels. The same update can be viewed as either devastating or completely insignificant depending on who's talking about it. And that's something I think JJS does surprisingly well. The developers are willing to make changes, a lot of changes.
Sometimes controversial changes.
Sometimes changes that make the entire community collectively lose its mind for 48 hours. If you know, you know. But the important part is that things actually change. Compare that to games that go months or even years without any significant shakeups. Eventually people stop experimenting, they stop adapting, the meta hardens, and everyone learns the correct way to play, and that's just the way things are. JJS hasn't reached that point yet.
I'm SpongeBob.
Whether it's Hikari, Naoya, Yuji, Mahito, or whoever becomes public enemy number 1 next week, the game is constantly forcing players to rethink what they know. And for new players, that's actually a good thing, because it means they're joining a game that's still evolving. They're not walking into a dead wasteland. They're walking into an active community that's still figuring itself out. Now, does that mean JJS is perfect? Absolutely not. The player base can be exhausting, the skill gap can be brutal, public service can feel like a social experiment designed to test human patience, but after looking at the characters, the balance, the competition, and the community, I think I finally have an answer to the question we started with. Is JJS beginner friendly? It depends. If you're asking whether the mechanics are beginner friendly, then yes. Most characters are easy to understand, the controls are simple, learning the basics doesn't take very long. But if you're asking whether the average beginner will have an easy time, that's a much harder question. Because your biggest obstacle won't be the moveset, it won't be the balance, and it probably won't even be the game itself. It'll be the guy with 700 hours, a Yuji avatar while playing Gojo, and enough movement tech to fry your brain. JJS is a game that's easy to learn and difficult to belong in. That's probably the most Battlegrounds game thing imaginable. Anyway, please subscribe. I have kids to feed.